Right, we're gonna begin. You are now live on YouTube, Cohen. So say hi to all 8,000 Morokai super fans.
8,000. I can't believe I finally made it. I'm on the Marokai stream.
Right, we are. Oh, we're gonna begin. Okay, I can also hear my own voice, so that might
Mm.
that might start an infinite feedback loop. Let's close that pretty quick. So
No, I think that's ideal. That's what you want, right?
I think so. Oh, I'm also gonna screen share in the Discord. Yeah,
Okay.
if you can hear that snorting,
That's the dog.
that's the Shih Tzu.
I believe
Yeah,
it.
it's not me and my like awful breathing problems.
No, no, no,
It's
no.
the dog. We're gonna start with a painting by Loon, which looks like this, and
Oh, everyone's here. They saw the YouTube notification.
everyone's emerged. Loon has said, I would really like feedback on this piece. I feel the overall lighting could be more interesting, and her face looks too wide. And then you're not sure with how you've drawn that angle. You'd also like critique about the armor and the design of the armor. Okay, let's tackle the face first. I think I'm just gonna disagree with you. I don't think it's too wide. Maybe it would depend on what you had in mind. It does just seem like a 3/4 to me. So, yeah, but it's fine. It looks good. I'm not too worried about it. Next thing is lighting. How do you push the lighting to make it more interesting? And I guess the extension of that is how do you use the lighting to tell some kind of a story? So this is a magical sword, crystal dagger thing. What sort of a thing is it?
It's supposed to be a halberd she's summoning.
A magical halberd. We love a magical halberd. And it feels like the halberd is glowing, but
yeah, but
but
I also wanted the wide skylight, and then I couldn't decide which one to focus on, so I just did both, and it looks bad.
I think you could do both in a way that accentuates both. So let's. This is a sphere. Right? And we'll pretend that's the skin of your character. And you could light it from the bottom. Right? And light it from the top as well. So let's just push that lighting on the bottom a little bit more. Make it quite bright. I think one of the problems with your bottom lighting is it's just not very bright at all. And then we can light it from the top with something warm as well. But I think the key here is that we get this sort of dark band going through the middle, and we can even accentuate that. Right? That's quite interesting as a sphere goes. But what you're doing with your character, by comparison, and the Shih Tzu is going to start complaining that it wants to be moved. There it goes. What you're doing with your character is, let's grab that flat middle. You're going, okay, I'm going to light it from the top with this huge light from the top, and then you're going, oh, now I'm lighting it from the bottom. And what you're sort of missing is that middle core shadow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So we can. Let's just take the face, shall we? Would that be easier? So let's just flatten out the face as if it's not lit. And maybe we'll literally just sample from this. I think that could be fun. So we can say, well, downward facing planes down here, like the top lip, the underside of the bottom lip, the chin. This is getting grade 8 up. Blah, 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 blah. And then we can also get something lighter hitting the top planes top of the cheek, or whatever. But in between those, you get something darker, right? And this is like a very quick NAF demonstration. But it's that kind of difference between the two, if that makes sense. Maybe we push the color. That I think would be interesting. I mean, if you're going for something very magical and mystical, I think just having that mystical thing be a bit stronger anyway, a bit more glowy and cool, you know.
Yeah, I guess that's also a problem of me wanting to do two different focal points and not deciding which one should be the main one, so
But
I got confused.
yeah, I think maybe the issue is that you're conceptualizing it as two distinct focal points instead of two focal points that are like linked to each other. So you could say the sword is a focal point, and therefore we're going to make it really bright and glowy and high contrast. And that's not to say that you can't also make the face a focal point, because it would be the glow from the sword, you know, and we might follow it through this arm, and it might lead us up to the face that also has the same kind of glow, hitting the bottom of it, right? So I don't think that's an impossible thing to do. But I just think you got to push the light at the moment. The uninteresting thing about the light that you have is that it's not doing much, or it's not strong enough, if that makes sense. It's very ambient. It's just very normal, that's fine as well. In terms of the design of the armor, I think I'm more of a fan of something like these, where the elements that you've incorporated, that you're designing, are breaking the silhouette more, as opposed to these pauldrons and this chest plate, where it's kind of just a normal pauldron with some stuff on top, if that makes sense. They are breaking the silhouette a little bit on the outside, but for the most part, it's just a regular pauldron. And then like these feathers poking out, I think that's cool, but maybe I would just accentuate them, and I'd say, okay, you're gonna have feathers poking out. Like, can we have feathers poking out? This is like a soft, poofy under padding that this pauldron sat on top of, and I think when you make it a bigger statement, it links more closely to like what's going on with the hair, right? And you get that repeated element throughout the image.
Yeah, I actually like that kind of like quite a lot.
I think as a general rule, there are a couple of ways of approaching it. In fact, I'll just make my canvas a little bit bigger. So I think we have a spectrum from, we won't use the word boring. We'll say from neutral or normal versus crazy or wacky. I always like wacky. And I think when you're deciding where on this spectrum your design should align, you can either start normal and then push it towards something crazy. So you maybe start from the baseline of just an actual piece of medieval armor that might exist, and then, well, actually, some of these shapes are more interesting, some of these visual motifs are interesting. Can I push them? Can I go a bit crazier? And so you're slowly sort of making your way along this spectrum towards crazy. And you have to pick a point at which you stop and you say, nope, this is crazy enough. I'm going to stop here. I think most people...
That's what I was doing.
Yeah, I think most people, if they do that, they're going to stop prematurely. They're going to go, oh, I don't want to push it anymore. And they're going to stop like here before they've gotten anywhere near super crazy. And it can kind of give your design a feeling of it it being in this awkward middle ground where you're pushing it a bit, but not quite enough for it to be seen as like a confident, interesting decision, if that makes sense.
It just looks a bit awkward and not
Yeah.
very skillful. I feel like.
So there is a solution to that. If you do wanna work in that way, there's nothing wrong with that. My friend Arne Billen, he's a CGMA instructor, you should check out his courses. He has this thing where he gets his students to look at their own work, and he says just push it like 10 or 20% more, and then they do it, and he says can you push it another 10% and another 10%. And so if you just keep asking yourself can I push it and forcing yourself into that, then that's okay. I approach it from the opposite direction. So I say that when you're designing, you should go really, 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 really crazy first, and just see how far you can push it. How crazy can you make it? And most of the time, you can make it way too crazy. But once you've found out where the too crazy line is, you might go, actually, I've figured out by pushing it and pushing it and pushing it that around here is a no-go zone. It's too crazy. I don't want that. Then this sweet spot here is right before it goes crazy. I think it's probably going to have the most visual interest and energy. That's what I reckon. So maybe just starting from the offset, saying, actually, I'm gonna make these. Maybe you make them way too big, although maybe that's cool as well. Could they almost come down like huge sleeves? They could do anything, and maybe that's mad, and then you just push it back a little bit until it works, until you're happy with it. So it's just the two opposite directions that you could approach a design from, basically. In terms of the rendering of the armor, it's quite nice. What kind of a material are you comparing it to? If you had to name like a metal.
It's supposed to be like a brass type color.
It's a brass color, but in terms of the
I need to
material,
look it up,
is it meant to be like polished brass? Is it meant to be old and
Like,
rusty?
I don't know how to describe it. There's like this brushed metal look where
Yeah.
it's a little bit shiny, but it's not like reflective.
Let's look at brushed metal brass.
I don't know if it's specifically a thing for brass, but that was.
You can get brushed any metal. You can get brushed metal, I would imagine. So this is brushed metal brass. And it is brushed. It's still quite reflective. Now maybe you don't want it to be that reflective.
Yeah.
But I'd say that you still want it to be reflective enough that it feels definitely metallic.
Yeah.
I'm getting that
always
feeling with
scared
the I'm getting that feeling with the breastplate. That feels metal, just because of that sort of cylindrical banding reflection, right?
Mhm.
You've got that there, and that works. But with the braces and the shoulder plate, they almost look like they could be stone or something to me, because they're lacking that range, the sort of contrast.
I didn't want to over-render them to like pull away from the face.
Yeah,
They're kind of far away from like the center of the piece.
that makes sense. I think I think there are other things that we can think about here as well, in terms of, because it seems like a recurring problem that you're worrying about the focal point to a degree where it's kind of interrupting your painting, and you're actually making decisions that aren't maybe as helpful because you're worried about where the audience is going to look. Have you heard about, from me or anyone else, the pyramid of fundamentals before?
I'm not sure I've heard of that specific term. No.
Okay, so the idea is that when we're learning our fundamentals, that there's this kind of an order in which we value them, or an order of importance when it comes to a painting. And it's not always true, but generally as a rule, I think it's pretty good. And the idea is that all of these rely on the one below. So you can imagine that if the values are bad, there's no possible way that the colours could be good because colours are based on value.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even if the values were really good, they rely on the drawing because if you put them in the wrong place, then they don't make any sense. Yeah. Strangely, I think this can kind of apply in terms of getting your audience's attention as well. And so, if drawing is the most important thing, which I would suggest it definitely is, then something like human hands or a human face is going to be way, way more important than value, edges, or color combined, right?
Yeah, that's where I usually put my most detail in, like the sketch.
Yeah, but even without thinking about detail, I think by virtue of the fact that you have a character who has a face, everyone will look at the face because that's human nature, and we look at faces, and that's just a sort of biological fact, right? I think you could put as much contrast as you want, wherever you want, and we're still going to look at the face because it's a character, and we want to know what the character's thinking. We want to look at their expression and know what they're feeling. You know, we relate to them, and we might not know exactly what this magical thing is, but we kind of understand it through their emotion, if that makes sense. You know, if they were frowning or if they look like they're in pain or something, then we go, oh, okay, maybe this is a scary thing. Whereas if they're like grinning, then we go, oh, well, maybe this is a fun magic thing. So when you're thinking about, especially something like the rendering on the armor, yeah, I don't think that's I don't think it's gonna pull away from something like a face. Like I can render this shoulder plate out to be just as shiny as you have the breastplate, and I think it's fine. In fact, the fact that these two now match means that maybe it's taking away even less attention from the character, right?
That's fair.
So yeah, I'd play around with that. I'd play around with how metal those things look, and then play around with that lighting. And obviously, the lighting has such a huge effect on the metal that you could do all sorts, and it'll be kind of tricky. But did you partake in Spoon June?
I didn't.
Are you aware of what Spoon June is?
It's drawing a spoon and like rendering it out every bit.
Yeah. And the idea is that approaching something like a character in full metal armor with a magical glow and a top light is really, really difficult, which it is, and maybe that's quite scary, which I think it is. But if we can render, maybe we just try and render a spoon. And can we render a spoon with this lighting scenario? And I think you can, because it's not, no one can be scared of a spoon, right? So if you can figure that out, then you can start applying that to something a bit more terrifying, and you'll be fine. That's my door, so I'm going to go and answer that. I'll be right back. I'm back. Right. What was I saying? Yes, applying something scary, use something simple to learn it. It's the same thing as anything. If you're learning how to like render, then maybe you start with a cube. You know, you're learning perspective. You don't go straight into drawing out an 18th century French building. You start with simple planes, right? So I hope all that makes sense. Is there anything else that I haven't covered that you'd like feedback on?
No, this was very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you for submitting your work and coming along.
Okay.
I'll put this as a reply in the Discord.
Yes.
Next, you're welcome. Next we have the Art of Sane. Let me just combine all of these into a group. With this spooky swamp lady. Someone said, what app am I doing? It's Photoshop. Yes. Someone else said, what Spoon June? I believe I just explained it. But I have a couple of YouTube videos on it as well if you want a more in-depth description. Art of Sane has said, you know you need to put in some more hours, but you'd like feedback on how to make it less horror and more mystical, mysterious. Okay. I think there are a few things that you can do, and I think some like we had here, where we're thinking about drawing first. I think we're going to think about drawing first again. So imagine that this is just a line drawing. I feel like you can test out a composition pretty well with just a line drawing. So forget that there's any color, forget that there's any value. What about this line drawing can we do to make it feel less scary? Because I think even in a line drawing, she's going to have these scary, like, pointy fingers. Even the way that those fingers are splayed out. You know, if I have my... the best drawing of a hand anyone has ever done. If I have my hands splayed out like that, I think that says something narratively that's very different to if the hand is, you know, relaxed or doing something else that's kind of weird. I think that's something. She's kind of got these big claws that are splayed out. This hand, I'm confused as to what exactly is going on. That's kind of scary. The fact that we can see the whole pupil of the eye is scary. So if we have an eye, in fact, let's draw a couple of eyes. I think normally the resting position of an eye means that you can see the bottom of the pupil, but not the top. If you can see the top but not the bottom, the person looks a bit crazy, and if you can see both, then they look very sort of alarmed and crazy. And then obviously you've got the cool, like, white iris, black, whites of the eyes are black in this case. So that's interesting. Even just looking at like where the waterline is meeting the head, it's going into the mouth. And the whole character, especially with all the movement going on, kind of feels like maybe they're drowning. Right? So if I just think about this as a drawing without the color, without the value, I'm looking at a character that's drowning and they are frantically moving their weird claw hands to try and keep themselves afloat. Like the position of the head tells me this is someone that's like gasping for air because they can't breathe. So how can you solve that? You could solve it in so many different ways. You could take it in so many different ways narratively. You know, could the face be just below the surface of the water? What does that tell us? Well, it takes away the drowning element and actually means that maybe she's about to come up to the surface, or she's quite happy in the water. She doesn't need air to breathe, and that's kind of magical or mystical. You could close the eyes a little bit to make the character look slightly more relaxed and less alarmed. I feel like mystical and alarm doesn't fit together, right? I think mysticism is something that we associate with maybe calm, and you know, it's not the same as something like very violent magic, if that makes sense. Mystical, it's like seeing a magical deer in a forest. Everything's very serene and still. At least that's what I understand by the word. Yeah, the fingers. Do you want it to look like the character is effortlessly floating in this pool rather than like trying to tread water? That's going to help as well. The camera angle that you've chosen, it's very asymmetrical. It's very chaotic. There's lots going on. Something mystical. I think maybe we can link mysticism and religiosity or religion. I think religious things tend to have an awful lot of symmetry. You know, could we have it like we're looking down at the pool, at the ripples, and here's the character's face, and then you can see their body under the rest of the pool or whatever. There you go, they got a big smile, but they're very devilish. You know, that might be some way of doing it, but actually having more of that symmetry might make it feel more mystical, like a religious painting. Does that make sense? There are obviously things that you can do with the value and the color as well. I don't want to completely discount that, but I just think they're so much less important. I think one of the things you can do is actually have more of a defined light source. At the moment, it's very, very ambient. Could it be that this is a lake that's just being hit by a ray of light from a particular direction, and that light filters into the water? That's quite a magical, mystical thing. If the character is lit from a light that's really shallow and along the water surface, like down here, that is going to give a very different feel to if the character is, maybe the character is lit from below, maybe the character is lit from completely top down. But you want to make a definite decision about that, because at the moment the character isn't lit from anywhere. Maybe you're saying the character is lit from top down, but it's certainly not a strong enough light that would be a conscious statement that you're making, if that makes sense. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's as much as I'm gonna say. Is you need to think about the story of it. As a viewer, I mean, just ask. Family members are great for this kind of thing. Family members that aren't even artists. Just send them your drawing and go, what do you think this character is doing? And if they say drowning, then you've made a mistake. So just play into that a little bit, Good. Who's next? DK is next, who I think just left. DK only wants advice on presentation, which is not my strong suit, but here we are. In fact, I feel like a lot of my stuff isn't presented particularly nicely. My opinion on this is so different to... I almost don't want to comment, because my idea of good presentation is going to be really, really different to your idea of good presentation.
Hello.
Hello. I was just saying, if you've only just joined, that my idea of good presentation is so completely different to your idea of good presentation that I just fundamentally feel that we have different opinions on this. And like for this entire background thing and like the framed border, I just wouldn't do them.
Okay.
I would have the character on some kind of plain background with like something subtle like smoke or something in the background down here.
Mm-hmm.
And that'd be it. So I don't know how useful that is to you. Do you know what I mean? I do see people that do this really well, and they have like a blown up version of the character in the background. One thing I would say is, if you are going to have a blown up version of the character in the background, blow it up more. So at the moment, it's like it's really not scaled up all that much, and so it almost feels like a drop shadow or something, like the character standing on front, in front of a cardboard cutout of themselves or something. Whereas I think maybe you could just take the head and shoulders, right? And so you have a much bigger version of the character's head and shoulders. The thing that springs to mind to me is those like, I guess it started with Star Wars and Indiana Jones way back when. But like movie posters where it's like, here's a big head and shoulders, and then like here's a little dude down here, and then someone else is down here, and then maybe there's like a really tiny character down here.
Yeah.
So getting that difference in scale might be something appealing. The other thing that does is it rather than, I don't know what... again, the problem I'm going to have, I don't know what purpose this serves, just having like a silhouette of the character behind the character. Unless you think it looks nice, in which case yeah, fine. But
I stole it from Pit.
from Pitt, well, if Pitt does it, then if Pitt can do it, I'll leave him to it. I won't judge. But I think at least if you blow up something like the head, then it's serving the secondary function of, oh, now I get to see this interesting part of the painting in more detail, right? So it's actually doing something for the audience, which I think would be cool. But other than that, I don't really have any opinions on it at all.
Wait, would you mind giving me an idea of how you would have presented the character better? Because I'm trying to learn.
I can just find. I think better is probably the wrong thing, isn't it? I can just find you examples of me presenting characters. This isn't a character, but it's a creature design, and I just put it on a blank background. Maybe I would, then write. That's the name of the creature or something. But I think generally my tastes are that I'm not a fan of the like having a whole lot of MacGuffin around. Just because I think that you've put lots of work into the character, and I want to see the character, and the character is the important thing. And so for you to then show me the character and a load of like graphic-y stuff at the same time, I just think any decision you make there is probably just going to take away from the nice design that you've made, if that makes sense. But I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to this, and I know that I'm a bit like, here's a prop design. It's just on a blank page. It doesn't have anything else. Because the other idea is that the design kind of speaks for itself, and it doesn't need much. I'll find one more or two more. Let's see.
The thing is, I want to kind of level up from just putting characters on a white background, because I feel like it's not very appealing. I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm just gonna grab. Oh, here's another example. So three different examples. In fact, 4 different examples. Let me grab this other one.
Yo, Sword Timber.
Yeah, September. That was a while ago, wasn't it?
No,
this is
be here
2022.
sooner than ever.
Yeah, it will be here soon. So like again, but I guess the difference is as well that most of these are just like sketches and doodles that I've done rather than something really, really finished. But that's one on a black background. There's another one. It's not like a perfectly blank background. It's got some kind of a gradient going through it. There's the sword timber. Here's the kind of thing I was talking about where it's the character and then the face. So at least you get some kind of blown up version, so I can see in a little bit more detail this part that's kind of interesting. Whereas if I put this guy and then just a perfect duplicate of this guy but darker right next to him, I'm not sure that would work quite as well. And there's another like little sketch. So some kind of an abstract-y background that's maybe implying a sense of atmosphere or form or something. But yeah, I think this entire thing is we're worlds apart on our tastes here. This is something I don't think I would ever do, but I do see a lot of people that do it and a lot of people that enjoy it, and so all the more power to you.
Yeah.
Hey Joe.
Hello, Anna.
Can I pitch in?
If you like, yeah.
Yeah, sure. This character design is something I tried to dabble in. But the presentation of a background, if you don't mind me hijacking the feedback a little bit.
Not at all, please.
You can. It's just people on the YouTube won't be able to see what you're doing. Is the only problem.
Oh, you're on YouTube as well.
Yeah, we're live streaming on YouTube.
Oh, I suppose maybe you could stream your screen.
Yeah, let me.
Me streaming.
Hold on. Okay.
Just take like a screenshot every
No, we're now
0.5 seconds and import it into Photoshop.
You are now being streamed, so everyone should be able to see what you're doing.
Yes, cool. All right. So presenting characters is actually it's not too different from just arranging composition. And if you know anything about composition, it's about choosing what your focal point is going to be. If you have a character like this, it's hard for me to decide what about the character is the most interesting to look at, and also the readability of the entire silhouette should remain uncompromised. So from the moment you have, for example, a dark value with a dark background, you're kind of losing some edges, and you sort of fix that with putting the white outline, which is something I used to do and Joe used to do, I think, as well, back in the day. But the white outline, it has a certain aesthetic, but it also tends to make your character feel like it's more of a sticker pasted on top of a background, which tends to flatten out the entire design maybe in its own. So when you're creating a composition, to put it simply, if you have like a character that you would want to draw like in a certain pose, and I'm just quickly gonna sort of sketch in a random dude that has no particularly interesting design or no particularly interesting pose. But it's basically the idea, if I have a character with dark values at the bottom, dark shoes perhaps, maybe dark hair, well, I'm not going to arrange my background so that I have dark values in my background behind the dark spots that actually are supposed to remain nice and readable, because that's essentially taking away the silhouette in its own. So what we can do, for example, with your character, since you have a overly dark background right now, but we have some value differences in our character, you can sort of think of it as arranging a checkerboard, where maybe behind the dark bits of my silhouette, I actually want to create a background that has a bit more of a lighter value, thus very clearly sort of arranging a focal point in my scene. And this composition that is a presentation of this character, because now I've really upped the contrast around that face, which draws more attention to it, and in the same sense that Joe said, keep it to a bare minimum or not a bare minimum, but try not to add too many little distracting things in your composition, in your presentation. The thing that you can play with is just graphic shapes and values and arranging them in a way where you are bringing forward the interesting bits about the silhouette rather than actually hiding them because you're sort of misarranging those values, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does.
Cool. Yeah, because it's not too difficult of a thing to grasp because values are just values. If you have a good grasp of values, you'll manage just fine. But it's sort of treating them as a composition and almost imagining you're doing a little bit of a value study of a character with a background and figuring out, okay, what's now the best way to make sure this character in particular stands out. But usually I tend to keep it just simple as well. Nothing too complicated because you don't want to distract from the nice design like Joe mentioned earlier. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Jens.
Cool.
Thank you.
No worries.
Right. Who's next? Did I post a response to the... Yeah, I did. Okay. Next is... I have a Shih Tzu that's walking over my tablet, which is... Come on. Behave, please. Is this... Right. The question with this is, it's just a quick sketch you've done and you're looking for any helpful feedback on anything you need to improve with. I think it's a sketch that is so much in its infancy that I don't know what that question would even mean. Improve on or help with is dependent on your goal with it. Is it for a piece of card art? Is it for a postcard? Is it something that you want to have as a profile picture or a banner? Is it like a key art? If it is a key art, what genre would it be for? What kind of mood are you going for? What exactly is this creature? What's its personality? What are you trying to convey with it? So there are lots of questions that you can sort of ask yourself, and in asking yourself those questions, maybe they'll that will reveal some answers as to how you should present the thing. I like this sort of, here's a side profile. You can tell a lot with a side profile, all those nice forms, and then that's sort of mirrored or duplicated again with the side profile of the mask. I think that's compositionally quite cool. I would avoid what I call the infinitely thin stick problem that I see happen a lot, where a character will be gripping something that's meant to be like a post or a rod, and the thing will be infinitely thin, like a single line. And it doesn't look comfortable. It doesn't look like it's holding up any weight, and it doesn't match the kind of realistic form that you have elsewhere in the image, if that makes sense. So, yeah, just actually define and come up with what it is that you want that post to be, and maybe that has some interesting forms on it and whatever else. I think the main thing I would worry about at this stage is, yeah, a bit like The Art of Sayane, it's just thinking about the story that you want to tell. I don't know what story you're going for, but I can tell you the story that I get from this, which is, this is quite a noble creature, although it is sort of, you know, it has some big claws down here. It's quite bestial, I would suppose, or primeval, primitive. You know, when you see like Quelaag in Dark Souls, with the giant spider boobies out, the fact that they are unclothed says something about their nature that sort of removes them. It takes them further away from something human, because anything human would cover up, assumedly, right? That's kind of all I get. Maybe if you want the wings to be grander, I'd push them further off screen. One thing, it feels to me like this wing is fine, but I get the sense, and again I could be wrong, I have no idea. I get the sense that this wing almost feels like you're trying to squeeze it on, like you're not comfortable letting it go off the edge of the image, the boundaries of the image. So I'd say either have it fully in, or just have it fully out, right? It's not sort of intersecting with this in an awkward way, if that makes sense. It's just one or the other. I make a definite decision when it comes to that. Yeah, the waist down here is maybe getting a bit sort of noodly and thin. Yeah, could we bulk it up and make it feel a bit more like a 3D form that's turning and twisting and has folds and whatever else. Again, I don't know exactly what the creature's doing, so it's a little bit tricky, but yeah, I think it's nice. This kind of shape language is kind of interesting, right? You got like the swirly bits, and then it almost reminds me of like an Art Deco fireplace or an Alphonse Mucha painting. But at the moment, that is the only place where they appear in the image, is right on the head. That could be deliberate, but it seems like it's quite a natural form that you would maybe want to repeat inside the wings, and wherever else you have this sort of hairy stuff. It's not appearing anywhere else at the moment. Well, it kind of is. There's little swirls, and again, it's tricky because this sketch is in its infancy, and maybe that's something that you were going to add. So I don't know how useful this has been, but I'm calling this feedback done, and we're moving on to the next one. The next one is Cloud Fluff, who says, I'd be grateful for any feedback on this. Let's bring it up on Photoshop first. In fact, let's combine these into a group. You'd be grateful for any feedback on this. It's not quite done. You're going for a found footage type lighting, like a flashlight. You're having trouble pulling it off. Okay, so the kind of lighting that happens with a flashlight is really highly specific, and it has a couple of very specific attributes to it that makes it feel that way. And I think we can maybe try and understand exactly what's happening there. So what you have is your camera, which we can call this little box. if that will. There you go. There's our camera. And the flashlight is not coming from inside the camera. You're not looking through the flashlight. If we were trying to emulate like a video camera, it might be that the flash photography element is on top or underneath. Maybe the person is just recording and they're actually holding a torch. So you've got a torch that's like down here. But the main important thing here is that there's some kind of an offset between camera and torch. Light and our viewpoint are slightly different. And that means that at the moment, nothing has a cast shadow, which kind of assumes that the light is also coming from the camera. But it should. Everything should have quite a crisp cast shadow right behind it, if that makes sense. So where this shoulder begins to interact with this tree, you know, it might be that there's a cast shadow. It might be that there's a cast shadow underneath some of these elements or on top, depending on where the camera is. I think it would be easier to show rather than tell. So let me just find a painting that I've done in a similar enough style. What year would that have been? 2020? So here are some scary, spooky flash photography things. And you can see that you have like the edge of the form and then that offset shadow, and the shadow becomes more offset the further away this thing is. So if the tree was even further behind, the shadow would be even further away. The offset is much closer to the original form if the thing it's being offset onto is closer, if that makes sense. Interestingly, it's not just about the character and the things behind the character. There are offsets on the character itself. So like the top lip leaves quite a sharp offset shadow on the thing behind it. The top of the nose, right? The cheek is putting a cast shadow onto the eye and the eye bag. Little spines are offsetting, and those shadows can be quite crisp because flash photography tends to be quite strong, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think at the moment it doesn't look super duper like flash photography at all. The other thing to bear in mind is just the contrast of the entire image. We're imagining that the camera is the only light source. Don't be afraid to get much darker with some of this stuff, right? I think that would be fine. But there's another artist that I will put in VC that I think you'll really like. His name is Oleg Vodenko. And he does exactly the kind of thing that you're thinking about doing. So one of the best things that you can do is actually some artist studies. Go and look at how he does it. Try and copy some of his images. One thing that really helped me, which is I guess the best advice I could give you, is definitely just think about the mechanics of it. Now I tend to think that I'm quite a technical person, and so understanding these mechanics helped me. And what I did when I was figuring it out and thinking about it was I hopped into Blender and I did exactly this. So I made a camera in my Blender scene, and then right below the camera, just offset by like a couple of centimeters, I made a point light, and it was an area light, and I made the radius of the area light really tight, like a tiny little pin light or a flashlight that's being fired, and I made it really bright as well. And you got almost immediately the effect that you wanted. So you could set up a Blender scene and do some studies of that, but I think the thing that's making this feel like it's not lit by a flashlight is just a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is that causes that visual effect, rather than any specific painting advice I could give you, if that makes sense. You need to understand what's happening and then try and emulate that in your image. So I hope that's useful.
It was useful, thank you. I didn't really think about the mechanics of it.
Yeah, and it's always going to be that way when you get any kind of visual effect that you're trying to describe. especially effects that are camera based, right? So found footage stuff, camera bloom, God rays, chromatic aberration. I think actually understanding the mechanics of it makes it fairly easy to replicate because you just know how it works, and that's quite fun. Rather than a lot of the artsy, abstract, painty stuff that is maybe a bit more subjective and a bit harder to figure out. So, yeah, I look forward to seeing you figure that out and apply it to a painting. I think that would be really cool, and it is a really, really cool effect. Do check out that artist that I put in the VC. I think that would be good.
Thank you.
Hello, Cohen.
Hello.
You want to do a lot more style frames, look dev soon, and you'd love some thoughts on how to approach it and improve your skills.
Yeah, very, very, very specific feedback.
I love these, man. Let me bring them up on stream for people. It's so fun.
Yeah, so these are for various animation projects for school. 2 of them are actual cell frames, and one of them's just basically an uncomposited shot.
Yeah. I love these. I think maybe we could get a bit more. I don't know what the limitations of animation entail. A little bit more punch. Like this red light. Is there any way that we can get it even brighter without it just killing it? It's difficult because it's like 100% saturation red, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, some kind of impact. You know.
Like just something to give it more contrast in general?
Well, I think that what I'm looking for is a contrast between, and this is me with my painter brain, and it probably won't apply to the style that you're going for. But I'm looking at this as a light source, and then I'm looking at this as a reflection of the light source, or an offset of the light source, and my painter brain is telling me that this cannot be anywhere near as bright as this because this is a pure emission of light, and this is the light after it's traveled a certain distance. And so I would be looking to make this even brighter to make it feel like it's glowing, but I think it works fine as is, and actually it's really graphic that this is all the same red color. I quite like it. Maybe you could get like a teeny tiny bit more specific with some of the shapes that you're using. Like, is there going to be some more green in here? Is that going to say something about the form of the face? But
oh, I like that actually.
It's such a nitpicky thing, just watching these. I don't think it's going to take you any more time than you're spending on it. Watching these forms as it goes down onto the neck, like onto the shoulder, like where the shoulder intersects with the arm. Is this going to come out further than the shoulder? I think designing those shapes to say something very specific about the form is going to be important. But no, I love these. I think these are this one especially is very...
yeah, that one took a lot more time than the other one.
Very, very cool. I think maybe the thing that is tricky to pass is I think this one works because it's all very rough and very scribbly, and that you played into that, right? It's like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film. And that's cool. And then this one, I think you've got really sharp, like this is such a sharp defined form that's going on, even like the cast shadow behind him. Maybe it's just because he's small. But definitely the chair, right? Definitely quite a bit of the perspective stuff that's going on. But then at the same time, like this pipe doesn't feel like it has it feels fine up here, it feels nice and cylindrical, and then it turns this corner and it feels like it sort of pancakes or flattens in a little bit, and then it feels a bit pancakey down here, right? Maybe even just something as simple as the lines that are going across it. So when you have you probably already know this, so just stop me if I'm So if I have a cylindrical form and I have lines going round it, concentric lines, what you've done is kind of like that, where the line is coming to a point, and then it's colliding with that outside silhouette. But what should really happen is the line should curve in to the rest of it, right? As it curves around and to the side. Can you hear the Shih Tzu?
Not really.
He's complaining. He's clawing at my legs to be let up. Oh, come on. Right.
Maybe he has a critique for me.
It's possible, yeah. But that's a kind of thing that I don't think it would take you any more time. I don't know if it's just because what you're going for is something that's a bit more deliberately scribbly. But like especially around this section where it feels a bit pancakey, getting that to wrap around a little bit better might make it feel more 3D if that's something that you want.
Yeah, I tend to get fairly lazy when drawing, and I just miss stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's a laziness problem, because I know that you can draw, and so taking the extra, it's not even any extra time. I think you could do these lines properly in the same amount of time. Like it's only going to take you maybe an extra 2 seconds per line or something like that.
Yeah.
To just
tiny
a little bit more, because as far as I would diagnose a problem, and I think it's a problem that happens quite often, and maybe we've spoken about it before, is you get the really cool, loose, scribbly stuff, and it feels really organic and scribbly, but you're playing this dangerous game where if I'm an audience member, you have to convince me that you are being deliberately scribbly and loose, and not that you just can't draw. And so sometimes it's like, well, that's really cool, this is deliberately scribbly and loose, I really like it. And then I look at like some of the chairs and stuff, and I'm assuming this is the one that's unfinished, right? Or
yeah, no, that was very much so. Like
yeah, but this is kind of scribbly in an unappealing way. This is scribbly like, oh, you haven't put the time into drawing it out, which is fine because it's for an animation or whatever. And I think playing around with that, some of the interesting forms on this planet, they're getting a little bit scribbly. Here's an idea that I think Craig Mullins talks about a lot, is scribbling within the confines of another shape. And you see like Leia Pinto and Kellen Jet and people do this, where it's like, if I have a very well-defined boundary for something, and that boundary is correct and well drawn and confidently made and whatever else, then thank you, dog. I just put him up on a pillow so he could look out the window, and now he's whining because he doesn't want to be able to. Right. But if you have that really strong, well-defined shape and boundary that's confidently made and is correct and whatever else, you can be as scribbly as you want inside of it. I could almost do like anything. And it's contained within something like that that's like very definite. And so maybe you could take a similar approach here where like you've got some of these shapes. Could they just be like a teeny bit more accurate? And then you could grab them. I know you want to keep this pretty graphic, but you could grab them, and inside of them you could do all the scribbly, fun, messy stuff that you want contained within that that thing. I guess it's just order versus chaos. It's why you find big, blocky, brutalist buildings that are like giant rectangles, and then they have a little bit of like hedging and plants at the bottom of them to contrast the sort of softer, more natural organic forms, and something very hard-edged and very ordered and structured.
What the fuck is going on with these birds?
I've got a dog, you've got birds. We're
just
inundated with creatures today, apparently. But yeah, I think I love what you're doing, and I love the energy that it's got, and it's so fun. I can see what you're going for. I think personally, I just like it to be that
Just a little bit
that
tighter, and a
10%
little bit more precise.
tighter. Yeah, because I feel like if you make it 10% tighter on one side, then you almost get 10% more leeway to be even scribblier on the other side, right? You get more trust from the audience that you know what you're doing, and therefore when you make something really scribbly and messy, we go, oh yeah, that's totally a considered decision and looks great. So just playing around with that, not bending it too far. But there you go. I hope that was helpful.
No, yeah, for sure. I gotta check myself more.
Just a smidge, just a
tiny bit.
Yeah.
I'll be sure to do that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Next is Eduardo, who appears to have painted Shrek, which I can't wait for an explanation for this.
Hey Joe, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I actually have an engagement that I gotta go to, so I won't be able to stick around.
Okay, you just tell me
If I
why
have-
you painted Shrek, and I'll give you some feedback, and
Okay,
you
cool.
can watch it
So
in the recording.
I had an assignment to paint. I started something recently, and I had an assignment to paint 2 characters from the same work, and to pose them in a way that shows off their personality.
Okay.
After that, I did a sketch, which was also part of the assignment, of them gender swapped. Then I posted a girl that was just a quick sketch, and the thing that I'm doing right now, which is the last one that I posted is the latest version. Is a girl, it's like a material study. It's this Japanese girl, and the face is supposed to be made out of ice, and the kimono made out of wood. Do you see that in the chat?
Yeah, I can see them. Okay.
So I posted 1,000 versions. Actually, this one, the latest one, is the latest version. Right?
Ah, okay. Yeah, I see the more recent version. Okay. I'll tackle all of these in order.
Cool. So the one I'm focusing on now, of course, is the girl, right?
Do you want me to do that one first before you leave?
Well, maybe. What I mean is, like, I know your time is limited, of course, right? So that's the one I'll still devote the most amount of time to. So that's the priority, I think.
Okay.
But afterwards, right? You can critique whatever you think is necessary.
Okay. So here's Ice Girl and Wood.
Yeah.
I think the ice looks like metal, and I think the wood looks like cloth.
So the wood is just sketched out, basically, right?
Mm-hmm. You've not yet got a lot of the wood grain that makes wood feel like wood. I think the other thing that happens with wood that you should be aware of is it gets a surprising amount of subsurface scattering, right? A lot of light enters it and then bounces around and bounces out. Wood is often described as warm. You know, if you ever go to a cabin, it just feels warmer, and it's because light is actually a bit like skin bouncing around in there, right? I think the other thing that I would really recommend that you do with these, with anything that you study, is just get a little bit more specific. What kind of wood is it? I know it might sound a little bit nitpicky, but there's a crevasse between, I don't know, like some crazy ebony wood, and then your maybe like a mass-produced recycled wood. That's a huge difference. And then, are you talking about wooden planks? Are you talking about machined wood? Are you talking about wood that's still on a tree that has bark? Are you talking about old wood? Are you talking about wood that is like overgrown or damaged, burned wood? Like, these are all really distinct, separate things. And I think in order to do a study like this, where you're considering turning this into a different material, just define exactly what your goal is, because whenever you're doing any kind of study, you're working within the parameters of a goal that you sort of predetermined beforehand, right?
So I just posted the references.
So you have a reference for the kind of wood. Okay. So this is like something very organic. My other issue with that last one is a very strange. Is that a real photo? maybe.
I think so. The simple
I
one?
I definitely wouldn't work from this
Okay.
because
Joe, I don't mean to be rude. I have to leave. I'll
no,
check out the recording.
that's okay. You check out
Okay?
the recording. I'll keep talking about this.
So thanks a lot, man.
You're welcome. Have a good.
And shout out to Arnie.
Yeah. Big shout out to Arnie all the time.
Okay.
Right.
Bye, guys.
You enjoy. So for future Eduardo and everyone else that's in the chat, I just wouldn't work from this. This is my worst nightmare when someone says, "Here are my references," and then it's another artist's work, because you're almost drinking water that's gone through another creature a couple of times, right? That's not the best way to describe that. It's been filtered by someone else. So you have this thing, this real thing, and then it's going through a machine, which is another artist, right? And they're outputting something based on their interpretation of this original thing. And so just go and get a photo of the original thing and interpret it in your own way. Like, sure, you can look at this and you can use it as inspiration to inform how you might want to approach it. Well, what decisions have they done? What did they think was important about the original source material, and why did they think that was important? Obviously, looking at other artists and doing master studies is quite useful. But if you're looking at rendering wood or ice, go and get some wood or ice, as well as the artist reference. At least get the real image as well. I think that's going to be super, super important. Yeah, I guess the wood is unfinished. The ice for me doesn't feel translucent enough. It's glowing, but I think there's a difference between the glow here. This feels like heat rising or something. It's coming mainly upwards from the actual doggy. And we have parts that overlap each other, where the neck is sat underneath the rest of it, and you can see that form going through. So there's that element of translucency. That element of translucency is missing here. Could it be that actually we see more of the neck go through, and it might be a little bit muted, but like we're seeing that form, something like that. Same with the nose. What's happening with this light? Where is it going? But yeah, my original point was all this smog. It's a huge, big bloom that you've gotten rather than something subtle. And I feel like the heat, or it's not even heat, is it? Just condensation or something? Whatever the sort of vapor is that comes off ice. It doesn't have a radius that's that big. You've made it feel like it's glowing, and it's not. So let's bring back the background. I think even just bringing back the background and removing the glow altogether makes this feel more like ice. I might be tempted. I know that artist hasn't. The other thing that you're dealing with here that isn't happening here, which is why you got to be careful with the references you get, is the two materials interacting with each other. I don't know if that's part of your goal when you're studying it, but I think that's what's going to make it look uncanny or weird, or like it doesn't make sense. Is actually, well, no, a lot of this ice is going to start to reflect some of these warmer colours that are going on around it, right? How is some of this stuff going to reflect into that? Because that reflection is what makes it look reflective and like ice or metal or whatever else. So you can't just stick a person in a metal suit of armor and not expect the metal to reflect its surroundings. It would look weird. It wouldn't look like metal anymore. And I think part of what makes this look like ice is it reflecting its surroundings. Certainly, I think the glow from the inside is good. I think maybe I would push that. And I know that ice isn't blue, but people think ice is blue. or people associate blue with cold and cold with ice. And so there is no shame in playing into an audience's expectations of something. I think as soon as you make it more blue, it feels more icy. Maybe that's just me. And maybe we bring back in some of that glow, but like I said, it's much closer to the original form. And I'm doing a very rushed job of it. Something like that, okay? So we'll grab that and we'll put that in feedback. For now, we'll move on to some of the other people that have asked for feedback, and we'll come back if we have time at the end to the Shrek images. Okay. So, did I just put that in? Yeah, I did. I'll add Eduardo. Who's next? Who's next? Who's next? And why is my music stopped? Oh, there it is. My relaxing Kevin MacLeod. Next we have Amor. You said you feel like something is off with the guy's face, but you can't tell. I'm no anime expert, but I'll take a look. Something's off with the guy's face. I think his neck and chin aren't interacting as I would expect them to, but it's anime-y, so I would expect from this angle. What you've got to contend with here is you've set up this 1-point perspective grid, but the really important thing to understand about a 1-point perspective grid is that you're defining a horizon line. So this is your horizon line. Your horizon line is where your eye level is. Okay? And so what we might expect, if we just extend this way, okay, is we're saying, let's represent these heads as cubes. And you're saying that this head is in line with the horizon line. And so maybe it looks like that. Okay, maybe that's even too extreme. But then this head up here is completely above the horizon line. And what does that mean? Well, it means that, actually, we're going to see a whole lot of the underside of it. You couldn't see the underside of this chin at all, but you can here. And we should actually see less of the top of the head as well. It's getting sort of further away from us as our eyes are going up. It depends on focal length and all sorts of other things, but generally I think the issue here is that we should see the underside of this chin and where it is attaching to the rest of the face. Something like the ear. The ear's probably going to be further up than you think. But yeah, I shouldn't see the crown of the head, I don't think. Can we just imagine that we're just seeing what's in front? We're going to see maybe more of the underside of the nose. I think the problem is that this isn't going to be a flattering angle, and your handsome anime man might not be so handsome after all. If we can see up into his nose. The other thing that is going to change is when we imagine a face. Let's imagine here's our face. There's the nose. You should imagine that the mouth is a sort of cylinder, right? And that cylinder sort of wraps around, right? It's called the barrel of the mouth. And so from a front on angle, those lines that wrap around are just straight. But the more we view this character in perspective, and I apologize for the dodgy cubes, the more the barrel of the mouth becomes obvious. Okay? But in a practical sense, maybe what that means is that actually the curve of the mouth has to wrap around that cylinder more, right? If that makes sense. So it has to sort of curve upwards the higher up this guy goes. And if there was another head up here, you know, it might be that the curve of the mouth is like that, and we're seeing loads of nose and we're barely seeing any eye at all, and the ear is like miles away, and we're just seeing loads of neck. So I think maybe that's the problem, is that you're setting out a horizon line, but then you're not considering the effect that has on his face. We're actually meant to be looking up at his face rather than across. So I hope that's useful. We'll see. Who's next?
If you're out of critiques, I also have like a perspective fuckery question, but I'll let
I have, I think, 2 more people to critique, but I'm going to be here until 6 p.m, so I'll probably have time to answer your question. Someone's just dropped in an orange. Is it an orange? Is it tangerine? These are the big questions of our age that need to be answered. It's a perfectly acceptable orange, except it's muddy. We were talking about things being muddy not long ago. Me and Anna Billin. One of the reasons it's muddy is because you're not making any kind of definite decision as it pertains to these shapes, especially your shadow and your highlights. Right, so take this highlight, for example. This is a series of very specific shapes, very precise shapes, that describe the surface of this tangerine, right? The light is reflecting off all of these dimples, and it's the dimples that make it feel like a tangerine, and not like a golf ball or anything else that's a cylinder, right? Did I just kill a fly? No, it's still flying around. So, instead of these very bright, very specific shapes, you've almost averaged out the shapes and dimmed the light because of it, right? So you've averaged out all those shapes into just something like that, which describes the form. Yeah, it's a spherical form. That's fine. But you've also made it just not as bright, and because it's not as bright, it doesn't feel like a pure specular reflection. It doesn't seem to match the rest of the painting, and so it's unappealing. It feels a bit grey, a bit stale. So maybe we bring the light in. We make this a bit more saturated as well. You know, and then can we actually just get the tangerine shapes? I understand that you're simplifying the form of it, but I don't think it's that much extra work to try and describe some of this stuff. And this is an important thing to learn, is actually how these shapes are doing what they're doing. Same thing over here in shadow, like where shadow meets light along this boundary. I'll use a colour that isn't red. You're getting all this interesting shapy stuff, and that interesting shapy stuff is telling us all about the form of the tangerine, and so you don't have that. You know, I'm not doing it perfectly, but I'm saying that it's lumpy in some way or another, even if I'm not actually copying the shapes that are there, just by having some kind of dimply lumply thing, it becomes more tangerine-y, I think. this top part is inset, which means it's got quite a strong shadow on top of it, and on this side of it. But this side of it is a bit brighter, which is fine. And then again, these are happening in such an interesting way. That is 100% describing the form of our tangerine. I think a fly just tried to get in my ear, but just collided with my headphones, which is interesting. Yeah, there it goes. So yeah, I think a big problem here is that you're just not describing the thing that makes this tangerine. You have an orange sphere at the moment with a thing at the top. In fact, some of the stuff up here that you've done to try and describe some of this more subtle form, I think you've done a good job of. So I don't know why you haven't done it everywhere, basically. Like those shapes are important. They're doing an important job. You know, even just those two there. The other thing is maybe we can get a little bit more saturated. It's a very organic thing, a tangerine, and it's sort of scattering this warm light inside of it. And so along the boundary between shadow and light, maybe we can just glaze in some more warmth. Make it feel like light is rattling around inside of this stuff. It's a cool exercise. Maybe I should get my students to paint tangerines. I never realized how cool tangerines are. So, thank you. We get tanging and reening, and people will love it. Oh, Loon, this is so nice. Yeah, I think this is much, much better. And I think it pushes the focus back onto the face a bit better because that bounce light's actually affecting it.
Yeah, I think so too. I also made the background a bit darker, so...
Yeah, so it's lighter by comparison. Something Caravaggio did a lot. Yeah. You want things to look brighter, make everything else darker. Maybe you can do that with your computer, Karen. Although that's already like pitch black, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Right. Who else? Someone has asked me to critique this. So, bam. And this person has said, making some early CS model stickers. Does anyone have any advice on how to make the visor juicier? Yeah, I do. You want to contrast light versus dark. You have some pretty dark darks elsewhere. Just slap them into the visor. So let's grab, that's the top curve. That's the bottom curve. Chop off. No, come back. Chop off the sides. You want it to be reflective. Slap a bit of light in. Don't be afraid. Slap a bit of dark in right next to it. Right. And you're done. Can I... Let's do that on a different layer so that we can show it. We'll slap a bit of light in. Maybe on the border of the light we'll put something really crazy saturated. And then almost right next to it, slap something dark in, and then the dark we can go something saturated as well. Oh, you got this cool blue light. Let's just maybe go a bit more crazy with that. And that just, it has a bit of vavavoom now. The other thing is the form in which I've done that. Right, it's cylindrical effectively, and because it's cylindrical, you get the banding vertically down the length of the cylinder. which tells us it's cylindrical. So if you can get some really strong straight lines in there, it's gonna exaggerate that fact, which is fun. That's very fun. Fish flops, you've made a weird little art. Yours is on the left. You had your friend repaint it on the right. You wanted to make the person seem cute, yet menacing, by having underlight reflected off the armor into her face, but the execution is quite lacking. Additionally, I couldn't understand how he chose colors in the paint. Okay, let's have a look at this. Let's group all of that. So that's your version. This is a paint over from someone you know. It seems like the color choices that they've gotten are just about playing with cools and warms. So you have this warm uplight, but it reminds me of this, the first thing we critiqued in this stream, which is, I think you have the same problem here. So your face looks a bit like this, where it is one color and then one bounce light. And what you might actually want is for it to look a bit more like this, where you have your bounce light, and then you have that band of something darker, and then you have your fill light or ambient light casting downwards. Oh, that's a terrifying clown. Okay. So that's what this person's tried to do. Where actually the middle of the face gets darker, and as it gets darker, it gets a little bit cooler. Like this. And it kind of accentuates the light and makes it seem lighter. And then, yeah, that light comes back onto the forehead or whatever. So hopefully that makes sense why they've made that decision. The other things they've done is they've made the metal a bit more metally, which is a bit like this, just being a bit stronger with the contrast that's going on, right? Which makes sense to me. I agree with that. I think one of the elements that you might also want to think about is the color of the light that's affecting the metal. So your metal is very monochromatic at the moment, which is fine. But something very reflective is going to reflect the color of the things around it. And so you want this to be a warm light going into the face. Well, maybe the light source that's hitting it is a bit warmer. Like there's no harm in maybe that, like the lighter parts of this being warmer, if that's what you want. And then I agree. Can we get darker as well to make this feel a bit more metally? I'm not really sure what's going on with the armor here, like under the arms, but that bounce light's going to be more intense if everything else is darker. I think we were just talking about it. It's the comparison between everything else that makes it feel a bit darker, including maybe the background. Can we? There's a horrible feathered edge. Let's turn our tolerance up from 1. Turn it up higher. Okay. Maybe we can get some kind of a gradient down. Maybe we can even get like a color in if she's meant to be menacing but cute. Can we get like the red of her rage? Right, so now that face feels like it's getting some kind of light source from below, maybe a bit more, because it's on a dark background comparatively. I hope that makes sense. is we're playing with dark versus light going on. Let's check the chat. Yeah. Same thing here with the hair. Like, actually, maybe the hair, as it turns away from that bounce light, should not get lighter, it should get darker. I think we're saying that this is... the bounce light is the focus, and therefore... or not even a bounce, does it have to be a bounce? I'm almost tempted to just make it lit from below, you know? You know, things are getting darker up here. Blah, 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 blah. That is going to bounce back up into there, but I'm also just not sure what this is. Like a sphere that's in the middle of the chest plate. That's the other bit that I don't quite understand. But if we want that to look like it's glowing enough to light up the whole face, then it should actually be glowing. Does that make sense? Like, this is a pretty strong bounce light we're giving it. And so actually making it feel like it's getting just bombarded with light. You know, like it's glaringly bright, like it's overexposed or something. And we could give the rest of the thing that same feeling if we wanted. But that's the best I'm gonna do, because I'm moving on to the next one. Next one is Jazz. You say you're new here. Let's just grab it and bring it into Photoshop. You're in the that's not right. You're in the Patreon now, aren't you, Fish Flops? So if you want more advice on it, just slap it in there. And I'll have more time to go over it then. Take advantage of the Patreon privileges and not the public stream that that there are more people that get feedback in. What's the question here? You're new here. You'd want to get crit on the study. It started off as a value study, but you noticed how inaccurate the face is afterwards. I don't know what I could have done to help the face read better or closer to the ref. Let's have a think, because it kind of depends on your ambition with the study. So you're saying it started off as a value study. Well, values are placed in a way that reflects the form of something. But, you know, not necessarily. It might be that you are still able to study the value, is still able to study how this shadow is coming across the cheek and following the form of that without getting the likeness perfect. That's fine. That's not something that you would need to get. But it's something that you might want to get. Are you interested in getting a perfect likeness of the reference? Is that something that you're kind of aspiring for here?
I've been studying how to do faces for a little bit, so I thought this would be a good opportunity to like combine what I knew about faces in like a value study.
Okay. Well, I think you're getting there. It's pretty close. I think the spacing between the eyes is maybe a little bit wide. It feels like the eyes are too far up, but I don't know if it's more that she's got more sort of hair on the top of her head. Do you see how much volume there is here versus this that feels quite flat?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a weird one, because you might look at this and go, well, I got the hair wrong, but, you know, why would that affect the face? But the framing of the face, and actually this says that there's far less skull under here, and when we think about where someone's eyes are placed, you know, the placement of the rest of the skull depends on that. You've really exaggerated some of this shadow here on the side of the forehead, which makes the whole face feel a lot more angular and less soft. This is a very, very feminine face that's going on here, and I think you lose some of that here. So, like, bringing the hair back over and actually just having less of a harsh transition as we go around here, it might be ideal. The other thing it does is it makes the hairline less harsh as well. So, you know, if I look at this, I'm actually having to ask myself, where does the hair start and the forehead end? So I could say there, or I could say there. Like, is this a shadow? Is it hair? I don't know. So just softening out the transition between hair and head, I think is generally a pretty good idea. Similar thing here, like there are areas of the face over here that are in the shadow of the hair that's next to them, and so the edge is a little bit softer, especially up here. And then obviously it seems to me that there's more volume. This side of the head is bathed in light. The mouth, is the mouth too low down? Too small? Too low down? Let's just grab it and move it up and to the right, just by like a smidge, maybe. Look at how much of an effect those big eyelashes and eyeliner seems to have an effect on the eyes. Like there's a reason that makeup exists, and it's to accentuate features and sort of change the perception of some of the forms of the face, whether that's to make them softer or harsher or anything else. And so it's something that I think people forget when they're painting women is actually the makeup that they have on and the effect that might have. It's something that you're unable to forget if you have a makeup obsessed fiance. So that's my top tip, is get yourself one of those. I think the form of the nose is again getting a bit harsh. Just look at this. Look at how soft the edge of the shadow is. The hardest point of the shadow is here, along the bridge of the nose, right, which we would expect. But especially when it gets round here to the rounded sort of bottom of the nose, or the tip of the nose, it's almost rendered as though it's a sphere. Like that is the tip of the nose. That may as well be a sphere rendered. Whereas you've gone, it looks like a piece of shortbread maybe, where it's a very sort of triangular, like a fish finger. So let's soften that out. There's no discernible difference between the light on the top of the nose and the light on that back cheek. Do you see how they're blending into each other? Whereas I think you're sort of determined to separate them with some kind of value.
Yeah, that was an intentional choice because I felt like if I made them the same value, it would kind of get like lost where the nose like ended and where the cheek was next to it.
Yeah, it will get lost, but that's the point. So there's a whole lost edges economy out there that painters love, which is when you're painting something, like, do you need that edge? Do you need the audience to know exactly where the model's face, model's nose ends and starts? Maybe, maybe not. Here's a study of a sergeant painting that I did, and I got my students to do. And the main element of it is that it started with soft edges, which are then slowly hardened. I'm losing information. I'm losing so much information, but I'm deciding where I want to keep information. So the jawline, well, that's gone. The line between the skin and the collar, that's gone. I don't want that. But I do want the bridge of the nose. So this is kind of the decision you made. I said I want to keep that. I want to keep exactly where that nostril is. I want to keep where the hairline starts up here, just that shape. And I want to keep the boundary of the ear very specific. But, you know, maybe some of the hairline up here, that can get really soft and wishy-washy. And you can sort of play around and see how much you can get away with, and you still see an image. I know this is kind of an over-the-top example, so let me pull up just an actual portrait. So this is, it's on my YouTube. It's my self-portrait from last year. And the same thing is happening, where here I want a really distinct separation between hair and face. And over here, it's much more ambiguous, like where does face end and hair begin, and what exactly is transitioning here, especially if I go black and white. Like, that's very, very soft. I want there to be some really clear boundaries set with the nose over here. I've decided to keep that nice and crisp and separate from the background, but actually I'm kind of okay with it getting a bit lost down here where maybe I don't want a viewer to look. And then don't even get me started on the beard. The beard goes right into the background. You know, my hair is getting lost in all of this shenanigans that's going on over here. So, yeah, playing around with lost edges. I don't think that's a bad thing. We can do it more. We can just grab a smudge tool, and it's going to lag out Photoshop. But, you know, can that be a bit softer? Maybe we need more of a shadow under the orbit of the eye. You're getting really subtle things like the shadows of eyelashes. Like, it's such a weird thing, but it has a big effect, especially on like a 1950s actress. So, yeah. A big part of painting is playing around with what you can lose, what you can leave out. You know, it's not about what you paint, it's about what you don't paint. It's about what's left behind. So
I was gonna ask, how do you like decide what you want to take out of the painting?
I think it becomes very intuitive eventually. I think in the meantime, you don't decide what you want to paint out or take out. You try and take out everything. So imagine you're more of a scientist running experiments or tests. You don't just declare that this is the cure. Well, you try lots of different ways of doing it and see which one works best. So it might be that I do a painting like this and I decide to take out this entire side of the face. But I might then paint this again and keep that side of the face and lose the edge of the nose and see how that works. And does it work? I guess the main thing that you should be thinking about is where you want someone to look, where you want someone to focus, what information is important. It might be that with this particular portrait, I thought that the shape of the bridge of the nose is quite a characteristic shape on this particular fellow. You know, and the edge of his mustache. Whereas if I were doing maybe this actress, this actress, I would want to keep more of that hard-edged information around the eyes, because that seems like a pretty important part of this person's look, right? And their mouth. They have a very sort of specific mouth, don't they, where that bottom lip is almost going in on an angle. So play around with it, but you know, I could be wrong. Maybe actually I want to lose something completely different. Can I lose like all of this hair to shadow? Maybe. Maybe I can do that if I just bring it back up here. Yeah, maybe I can get away with that. Maybe I can't. Maybe I can lose a lot of this to light. So
Can I attempt to expand upon this again?
You can if you like. I'll just finish by saying that the benefit that you have is that you're using a digital tool, and as with anything you study, you have unlimited canvases and unlimited undo tools, and unlimited attempts at this thing. So play around and do a lot of trial and error and exploration, and see what you like and see what you don't like. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll put this in feedback, and then if you give me a sec, and I will.
Yeah, no worries.
I'll screen share your screen.
Sure. Because it's kind of same sort of, I guess, fundamental rule underneath it as what I was saying earlier. So Lost Edges, I think, is pretty interesting because it is definitely something that just makes things feel a bit more deliberately chosen rather than, if you take a picture, you have sharp edges everywhere, but the benefit of painting is you get to choose which parts of your painting are more important than others. So, for example, if we have a composition like this one, which is one I made for a course of mine, we have a couple areas that are very, very clearly defined by value contrast. Like I have this edge of the skull that's very clearly defined. I have a little spot right there. I have the edge of the horn right there, and then we can see the negative space, which is also quite deliberately, maybe a bit more clearly defined. So I have all of these edges, and I'll just outline the edges that I didn't lose in red to really emphasize, or to really make sure that you understand like where that decision making is coming from. So as you can see, if I would just get rid of the painting already, I would almost have a clear image of what the focal point is just based on the edges that I decided to keep in. Now, why are these edges important? Because these are design defining edges, they're silhouette defining edges. So whenever I have a part of my silhouette that I definitely want to be readable, I'll adjust my value so that that part of my composition stands out. Like for example, with the skull on its own right, the way I've arranged the dappled light, I've chosen to have this eyebrow in light because if I don't, that edge just becomes that much weaker, and I think I run the risk of sort of losing too much information about the top side of that silhouette, which in some cases could be beneficial to the painting, because that way maybe I might concentrate more of the focus over here. But if it's about clarity of the entire thing, that one piece of dappled light actually helps quite a lot with just emphasizing the clarity of that piece of information. In the same sense, this edge over here, that's completely lost. It's not important because I have the peak of the horn right there, so I don't need the base of the horn if this is readable, because this lets me know that the horn is there. And then the viewer will just kind of fill in the gaps themselves, which is overall a much more appealing way to go about creating compositions. If we have a look at the paintings that I was doing earlier, in the same sense with these trees, for example, because foliage is basically just spheres pasted together, but here you can also see I have a lot of lost edges, right? Like technically I could say, well, yeah, what if this is actually one tree, one canopy, and then this would be another one, and then I'd have another one right there. Do I really need to have all of these edges be visible? No, because that will become too much of a distracting image. Instead, I've opted for actually creating one nice and appealing graphic shape that shows me all of the leaves that are in light, and I've decided to connect them in one shape because that's a lot more easily digestible, since kind of the point of creating art is kind of simplifying reality so that the viewer doesn't have to do that anymore, in a sense. The tricky thing is to then you have to design these shapes so that they describe the form. So these shadow shapes describe the ambient occlusion in between these separate spheres of leaves, basically. Like this shape, for example, I very clearly have my core shadow of this sphere right there. while this is the top edge of a sphere that's underneath here. So this shape alone tells me connects these two without me actually having to paint the two spheres separately. So I hope that sort of clarifies things, makes sense.
No,
That's
I
how
can
I think.
understand that. It's like a deliberate simplification to like kind of
Yes.
make the image. Like,
And in the
mesh
same
better
sense, you
together.
can absolutely. In the same sense, you can also choose. Oh yeah, maybe this is actually quite an important part of the painting to be visible, because that shows me the edge of the trees right there, and that might be a nice place to kind of put a little bit of extra focus. Same thing over here with this edge that's very clearly visible over here as well, but then this is lost because that's not as important, and this one is very clearly defined again. So it's almost like arranging a bit of a checkerboard pattern where I have a light background on top of a dark foreground, and then a dark foreground on top of a light background, of course relatively, so that I can arrange my values so that the entire silhouette becomes readable without me just having to put a dark shape in front of a light shape. You can choose where you want to put these shapes, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, no
I'll definitely
worries.
keep that in mind when I'm painting.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Can I ask one more question to Moro?
Yes.
Okay. It was about what you mentioned with me doing too many like hard edges. Is there anything that I could like study in specific to get better at that? Because it is kind of like a habit of mine to like
Yeah, just
repeatedly do
a lot
hard
of
edges compared to like softer.
a lot of old painters are really good at this kind of a thing. Not even old painters, just a lot of traditional painters have to contend with brush economy and placing a lot of these edges, especially with a material that doesn't favor you placing lots of hard edges like oil paint. I've been trying to do some more oil painting recently, and just the nature of the thing sort of forces you to combine shapes and group things together. So I'm always looking at old traditional painters for inspiration when it comes to brush economy and edges and that kind of a thing. You'll find that most people thinking about edges digitally are still sort of it becomes a game of emulating traditional paint in a sense. The kinds of soft edges that you have, not all soft edges are the same. You could have a soft edge that is like this, but you could also have a soft edge that's like that. That's soft. That's soft. So there are all sorts of textures and things that you can explore at the same time. But yeah, look at traditional painters, master painters. Do some painting from life. Try and group things. I think the nice point that Anna made was that a lot of the grouping isn't even done in the painting stage. It's done in the drawing stage. So I imagine that when you're drawing this, you're conceptualizing it as a solid form, and so you're drawing it and you're going, well, this is the nose, and you draw a line for the boundary of the nose.
Yes.
Yeah. Whereas I think Ernst and I would probably approach it. I'm calling him Ernst and Arn Billen interchangeably here, but you're now just Arn Billen everywhere, aren't you? No one can find you as Ernst anymore. Is that right?
I think maybe on YouTube I'm still Ernst. I don't know.
Okay, I'm gonna.
I can change my nickname here to Ernst maybe for convenience sake.
No, I'll get used to whichever name you prefer, but
I just have to choose one.
You just have to pick one. Yeah. So while you're thinking about you're conceptualizing the nose as a 3D form, I think me and Anna are more concerned with conceptualizing these graphic shapes, and they describe the form of the nose, so they're doing the same job, but we're more worried about the 2D shape and how that relates to the 3D form rather than just the 3D form. And so, could I have an almost completely, do I even need the eyes? Could I get rid of the eyes and just say, well, they're in shadow, that's just a shape? Well, yeah, probably it still reads as a face. Could I simplify the mouth? Could I join those two together so we're not even getting any information about the corner of the mouth? Yeah, probably. Could I join up the shadow of the neck with the shadow of the side of the face, yeah, it still reads absolutely fine. And so you can get away with doing an awful lot because the human brain is very powerful. You know, when you see videos of conspiracy theorists saying that there are like human faces on the surface of Mars, you know, the only reason that is because we're very, very good at recognizing shapes and patterns and faces and hands and whatever else, and so you can use that to your advantage, you know.
That's a very interesting approach to like first drawing it, because like I mentioned earlier, I just like started with like all straights, like trying to get the construction down first
Yeah,
instead of like looking for those like big shapes.
I think it was one of the critique video should still be up on YouTube. I recommend you go and watch it. I think it was last week's critiques. Who did I critique? Last week's critiques, I critiqued Nitram. You can also just scroll up in the feedback channel and see it. I critiqued Nitram, and I did a very similar thing. I'll bring that up on screen. Where like this is maybe how I would start a study. Right, where I am just separating it into these very simple shadow and light groups that are, it's just a collection of shapes, and if you take any one of those shapes and you take it away from the rest of the image, like, okay, that means absolutely nothing to anybody, but in the context of everything else, next to all of the other shapes that are placed where they are placed, it begins to look like something, and this is like, I guess this is at the very core of image making. It was DK. I did a critique for DK. I'll bring that one up as well. And it was a similar thing where DK is approaching it a bit more like you, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. You can approach it that way. A lot of artists do. Where he's thinking about the drawing, he's thinking about the form, and he's describing that. And I was just saying the exact same thing, that, you know, I'm probably more likely to begin a painting like this, where I'm just thinking about, like, that is a wacky shape for this eye socket going onto the top of the cheekbone. But it works within the context of all the other shapes that are about. You can look at, forget traditional painters. What am I talking about? Comic artists. Look at comic artists and how they do this. That's like all comic art is a series of graphic shapes that we interpret as something really cool. Dan Milligan is the storyboard artist that I always bring up as a really good example of this, so check out Dan Milligan as well. I think that's me done. I have 3 minutes left, which isn't really enough time to critique anything. Thank you very much, Arnie Bullen, for joining in as well. I'll just send me whatever you want linking, and I'll put it in the description of the video. But yeah, thanks everybody. Join next Monday. It should be back to the normal time, so 6 till 8 British summer time. That should be alright.